Okay, hello, I'm Chris, and this is my how to wire up a 3-wire GM internally regulated alternator like this one. This video is going to show you everything you need to know to wire this up on anything, an old tractor, a deer lease vehicle, a Jeep, anything that they have a conversion kit for. Show you how to put this on there. So the main thing you need to know about this is that this is a 12-volt system. Okay, so if you're putting this on something, you need to go through that and make sure that you convert everything you need to convert over to 12 volts. Another thing is that we're going to be talking about the wire size. This right here charges the battery. This needs to be a 10 gauge stranded wire. I'm going to make a custom wiring diagram so you can screenshot it. Okay, now I'm just going to go over the wire sizes and how to wire this up if you want to screenshot a diagram and talk about it. Okay, so all these parts are grounded naturally, so I'm not going to do anything with the ground side. Okay, so we're going to do this in the color style of GM since this is a GM alternator. Okay, that's the only wires that I know. Okay, so the main thing we're going to connect is this battery right here. We're making this wire extra big. That's the only thing that big cable should be going to. Doesn't have to go to anything else, just right there on the starter solenoid. Now I forgot if it's a 1/0 or a 2/0. We're just gonna put big cable. Okay, that's the only thing that this is supposed to be connected to. Now you want to I hope you understand what the junctioning block is. This right here, you can easily add that. It would be like a junctioning terminal or terminal block or junction block. You could probably buy that anywhere. And the way that the GM style is they have a 10 gauge run here. And that's what I was talking about. It's very important that you use the right gauge wires. You can't play around and put an 18 gauge right here. You can't play around with these wires, so that's why I'm telling you what wires to use. This junction block is where this is going to go to. This is the wire that charges your battery on your alternator. This is also a 10 gauge. Now your ignition switch is going to need 12 volts from the battery too. Going back to the junction block, the ignition switch is going to use another 10 gauge red wire. We got the hots run. Okay, now let's get into the alternator. The number 1 position is a exciter wire / dummy light wire. The way that this is run is it gets 12 volts on with the key and goes through a 194 dummy light. Oh, I forgot to put that. The only thing that you have to do to number 1 is to turn it on hot with the key. On with the off, on, sends power to this terminal right here, exciting the alternator. This wire also goes through a 194 bulb they call the dummy light, and it will turn on when you turn your key on. When you crank your engine, as soon as it starts charging, it interrupts that circuit and it shuts your light off, so it's not going to have any power in it after it starts charging. Now GM cars, this would be blue. Going to that, this is an 18 gauge blue wire. Now you could run it blue all the way, but the way that they're run is brown. 18 gauge. Okay, so that's the way that they run it back to the dash for the dummy light. Get back. Okay, so number 1 position, very simple. 18 gauge through a 194 dummy light. through a 194 dummy light, and then over to the ignition on with the key. Very important. You do not run this wire constant all the time. It'll drain your battery down. You do not wire. You have to wire this ignition on only. Very important that this is on with the key and off with the key. Okay. Okay. The number 2 position on this alternator is a voltage sensing wire. All it has to do is go back to 12 volts. Now this is the one where people will jump it over here. I don't like to do it like that. I will run it back in the harness to the junctioning block. But it's very optional. On a tractor, of course, you would just jump it right there. But if you have, you know, try to keep it neat. I have other videos talking about that. But you can jump it here or here. So we're going to use a dotted line. Okay, so we're going to use that dotted line. This is an 18 gauge. Okay, so sorry, that's supposed to be white, but just showing you that dots because it's optional where you run that. Okay, now the last thing is the starter. Okay, so you got 10 gauge running in, and this starter wire is purple. Starter, solenoid, whatever it really is, I don't know. This is a 10 gauge purple wire. 10 gauge purple wire going to your solenoid to start your car. Okay, the only terminal left is accessories. We're not going to use that on this. That's when you turn the key back. You turn your radio on and stuff, accessories. And in our position, that's points ignition. You would run this to the coil, but we're not going to get into that. Sorry. Just in case you're wondering. Real quick, let's just talk about the key real fast. So I'm going to take it out of this. But the key, the accessories, is that when you turn the key back, this is off. When I'm talking about ignition on, I'm talking about the first click. And then when you start the car, it sends power to S. Only momentarily to crank. And then when it starts, it goes back in the on position. So the key stays in the on position. And then you turn it off. And then accessories. Just to make that 100% clear, because this stuff is getting old now. If you were doing this in a tractor or some old kind of car or something, you would figure out a way to mount the 194 bulb right there. Just wanted to show you that. And this is a universal ignition switch. Okay, we're going to go over wiring it right now, but that dummy light is going to work on this setup. We're going to go ahead and do it like it was in the car. You're going to go ahead and hook your battery up, and this battery cable is going to go. This was the big cable we're talking about. There's only one. The only thing that this should be going to is the starter solenoid. Alright. Now in these systems you have a junctioning block. You can use a terminal block, junction block, whatever you want to call it. Some cars have a horn relay with a bus bar. Some people will actually run that back there. You can do whatever you want, but I like to make things look like the factory made them. Okay, so I'm going to use this little junctioning block. Okay. And note that these are 10 gauge wires right here. Okay, so if this is coming straight off the battery, we need a 10 gauge wire to feed our junction block, because this is where you would run accessories off. Okay, the next thing, we're going to hook our, now this wire charges the battery, charges the system. It's a 10 gauge wire. It's the only thing that should be connected to this bolt right now. Okay, now we run this back to the junction block, and you can kind of see what's happening now. See, we got straight from the battery, so this is charging straight here, charging the battery. Just want you to see how that's labeled. Accessories, we're not going to use accessories. The starter wire bolts to the back right here. Okay, this is just a universal switch. To wire our switch up, you have to run 12 volts to the switch on a 10 gauge wire. This needs to be a 10 gauge wire for sure. Okay, so you're going to go back to the junctioning block. Got that hooked up, battery to junctioning block. Now we're going to hook up the starter wire. Go into the solenoid on the starter. Make sure you have it in the S position and not in the R. Or it won't do anything. Okay, purple wire goes back to this place on it for the starter. This is our little dummy light going to the dash. We're going to put number 1 position, the exciter wire / dummy light. 1 position, goes through a 194 bulb, and it goes back to the key switch, and it comes on with the key. On with the key. Ignition, on with the key. Okay, now the number 2, voltage sensing. Like I was saying, you can either run it right here back to hot, or you can run it to the junctioning block. I'm going to run it to the junctioning block. Now that you see the way everything's wired up, the steps I went through to wire it, how I wired it, the junctioning block, the dummy light's going to work. And real quick, whenever you turn this on with the key, it sends 12 volts to number 1 position, exciting the alternator. As soon as that alternator starts charging, it's going to interrupt that circuit and shut this light off. Okay, so if you are testing an old alternator and for some reason this light won't shut off, the alternator is bad. Okay, you need to buy you a new alternator. Just went through that the other day testing an old alternator. Light wouldn't go off, but it was still charging. So that alternator's a core now. Okay, so that will happen. The alternator can still be charging and not shut this light off. So if it doesn't shut this light off, you don't need to put a diode in there. Number 1 position comes on with the key, excites the alternator. When the alternator starts charging, it shuts this light off. Now, if this light does not shut off, it can still charge and not shut off. You need to go buy another alternator because the alternator is going out and it's going to start giving problems. I had one I was testing like that the other day. The light went off, and then it wouldn't go off, and then it would charge, it wouldn't charge. So there's something in there, I don't know, it's beyond me, but that light stays on, go get you a new alternator. Well, I hope you understand a little bit more about what's going on to run that alternator. It's very simple. Ask me any questions. Thanks for watching.